The evening began like many others. The restaurant lights were warm but not bright, the kind that made shadows soft and faces look calmer than they really were. Outside, traffic moved in slow lines, and people passed by without thinking much about what was happening inside. Inside, the sound of forks touching plates mixed with low voices and the steady hum of a busy night. She moved from table to table with practiced steps, not fast, not slow, just right. She carried plates, refilled glasses, nodded politely, and smiled when needed. Most people barely looked at her face. To them, she was part of the place, like the chairs or the menus, someone you notice only when something is missing. Her shift had started hours earlier. By now, her feet ached in a quiet way she had learned to ignore. She had learned to ignore many things over the years. The long hours, the small talk, the way people sometimes spoke without really seeing her. None of it surprised her anymore. The restaurant was popular, but not fancy. A place where couples came after work, where families gathered on weekends, where solo diners sat near the windows with their phones and thoughts. The music playing from the speakers was soft and forgettable. No one came here for a dot. In the far corner of the room stood an old piano. It was dark wood, slightly worn, with a bench pushed close underneath. Most nights, it sat untouched. Some guests asked about it from time to time, and the staff usually gave the same answer. It was just decoration now, something left behind from an earlier time. As she passed by that corner, her eyes drifted there for a moment, not long enough for anyone to notice. Just a quick glance. Her hands tightened slightly around the tray she was carrying, then relaxed again. She kept walking. She had learned to keep certain parts of herself quiet, hidden. Life had taught her that not everything needed to be shared. Some things were safer when they stayed inside. At one table, a couple asked for the check. At another, someone wanted more water. She listened, responded, moved on. Her voice was calm and even. If anyone had paid close attention, they might have noticed how gentle it was, like someone used to listening more than speaking. In the kitchen, dishes clattered and voices rose and fell. A cook called out an order. Another laughed loudly. It was loud back there, but she liked that. Noise could be comforting. It filled the space so her thoughts didn't have to. She had been working jobs like this for a long time, long enough that she no longer counted the years. Restaurants, cafes, small places where people came and went. Each place felt different, yet the days blended together. Wake up, work, go home, repeat. Sometimes, during slower moments, she wondered how her life might look from the outside, what story people would imagine for her. Most likely, they didn't imagine anything at all. She stopped briefly near the service station to write down an order. Her handwriting was neat and careful. She had always written that way, slow, steady, deliberate. She tore off the slip and placed it where it needed to go. A soft laugh came from a nearby table. Someone was celebrating a birthday. A small cake appeared with a candle flickering on top. She watched as the group leaned in close, smiling, phones coming out to capture the moment. For a second, something warm stirred in her chest. Then she turned away. She had celebrated things before, long ago. Achievements, small wins, moments that once felt big. Over time, those moments had grown fewer, or maybe they had just become quieter. As she carried another tray across the room, she felt the familiar pull again. That corner, the piano. It seemed to sit there patiently, like it had all the time in the world. She remembered when pianos were not silent objects in her life, when keys were not just keys, but stories, emotions, release. Back then, her hands had known exactly where to go. They had moved with purpose and trust. She pushed the thought away. This was not the time. This was never the time. A guest waved her over and asked about the piano. "Does anyone ever play it?" The guest asked casually, not expecting much. She smiled, polite and small. "Not really," she said. "It's mostly just there." The guest nodded, already losing interest. Conversation moved on. That was how it always went. She returned to her work, orders, refills, small apologies for small delays. She handled everything smoothly. Her co-workers trusted her. Managers rarely worried when she was on shift. She was dependable. That word had followed her for years. Dependable people often went unnoticed. She knew that well. As the evening settled in, the pace slowed slightly. The rush faded into a steady flow. Some tables emptied. New guests arrived. The air felt calmer, heavier, like the night itself was stretching out. She wiped down a counter and glanced at the clock. Still time to go. She didn't mind. Work kept her mind busy. But even as she focused on her tasks, A quiet feeling sat just beneath the surface, a feeling she couldn't fully name. It wasn't sadness exactly, more like a soft pressure, a reminder she had not touched a piano in years, not since life had taken a sharp turn, not since responsibility had stepped in and demanded space. Dreams, she had learned, were flexible things. They could be folded up and stored away, yet some dreams never really left. They waited, a slight pause, and orders gave her a moment to stand still. She leaned against the counter, just for a breath. The room was filled with low sound, cutlery, murmured voices, the background music looping again. Her gaze drifted, without effort this time, to the piano. The bench was empty. The keys were closed, but she could imagine them. White and black, familiar, inviting. Her fingers twitched at her side. A small movement, almost nothing. She straightened up as someone called her name from the kitchen. She responded right away and moved forward, pushing the thought aside once more. Still, something had shifted, just slightly. The evening continued, but it no longer felt exactly the same. Not to her. There was a sense, faint but present, that something was waiting. Something small, something unexpected. She didn't know it yet. But this ordinary night was already different. Not because of the food, or the guests, or the quiet piano in the corner, but because, for the first time in a long while, she had allowed herself to look at it not as decoration but as a memory that had not faded. And as she walked past it once more, her steps slowed, just a little. The evening moved forward, slow and steady, like it usually did after the rush passed. Plates were cleared, new orders came in, and the sound of talking stayed low and calm. It was the kind of night that felt safe in its routine. Nothing unexpected ever seemed to happen on nights like this. She continued working, but her mind was not fully settled. The feeling she had earlier had not gone away. It stayed with her as she walked, as she listened, as she smiled at guests. It wasn't loud or demanding. It was quiet, but steady. Near the back of the room, a small group had finished dinner and was waiting for dessert. They talked easily, laughing now and then. One of them glanced toward the piano and leaned closer to the others, saying something she couldn't hear. A few heads turned. Curious eyes followed. She noticed, though she tried not to. She had learned how to notice without reacting. One of the guests raised a hand and called her over. "Excuse me," they said kindly. "Is that piano still working?" She paused for just a second, long enough for the question to settle. "I think so," she replied. Her voice was calm, but something inside her shifted again. "Does anyone play it?" the guest asked, smiling. She shook her head lightly. "Not really. Not anymore." The guest nodded, but instead of turning away, they smiled wider. "That's a shame. It's a nice piano." She returned the smile and stepped back into her work. But the words stayed with her. "Not anymore." In the kitchen, there was a short delay. A machine had stopped working, nothing serious, but enough to slow things down. Orders paused. Staff leaned against counters. Someone checked their phone. Time stretched in a way it usually didn't. She stood near the edge of the room, waiting for the next thing to do. For the first time that night, there was nowhere she needed to be right away. A coworker walked by and followed her gaze to the piano. "Funny old thing," they said. "No one ever touches it." She nodded. "Yeah." There was a brief silence between them. Then the coworker laughed softly. "You play?" The question landed gently, but it hit something deep. She shook her head at first. "Not really." But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. "Not fully." The coworker raised an eyebrow, half smiling, but didn't push. They moved on, leaving her alone with the thought. "Not really." She looked at the piano again. This time, she didn't look away so quickly. She noticed the small scratches on the side, the way the bench sat slightly off-center, the quiet dignity of it, waiting. Her heart beat a little faster. She didn't know why. It wasn't fear exactly. It was more like standing at the edge of something familiar that she hadn't visited in a long time. From one of the tables, someone spoke up. "If someone played, that would be nice," they said casually, not expecting an answer. A few people chuckled. Someone else agreed. "Yeah, live music would be great." The comments floated through the room, light and harmless. But to her, they felt heavier. She told herself to ignore it. This was not her place. She was here to work, not to perform. This was not her world anymore. Still, her feet didn't move. The background music from the speakers ended, and for a brief moment, there was nothing to replace it. The room felt different in that silence, more open, more aware. She took a slow breath. "I can play a little," she heard herself say. The words surprised her as much as anyone else. A few heads turned. The co-worker looked back at her, eyes wide with curiosity. Really? She nodded, unsure but steady. Just something simple. There was a pause. Then someone clapped softly, encouraging. Others smiled. No one demanded anything. No pressure. Just interest. Her hands felt warm. Her mouth felt dry. She walked toward the piano before she could change her mind. Each step felt heavier than the last. Memories rose with every movement. Old rooms. Old sounds. Long hours spent practicing. Moments of pride. Moments of disappointment. She reached the piano and lifted the cover slowly. The keys were smooth under her fingers, familiar in a way that almost hurt. She sat on the bench. It creaked slightly under her weight. The sound made a few people smile. She placed her hands on her lap and closed her eyes for a brief second. Just to breathe. Just to remember. This was not a performance. She reminded herself of that. This was just sound. Just something simple. She opened her eyes and placed her fingers on the keys. The first note was soft, almost unsure. It floated into the room and faded gently. She played a few more notes, slow, careful. A tune so simple it felt like a whisper. At first, people kept talking, quietly, but still talking. Then one by one, voices faded. Someone stopped mid-sentence. A fork rested on a plate. She kept playing. Her hands remembered more than she expected. The tune flowed easily, like it had been waiting. She forgot, for a moment, where she was. She forgot the tables, the orders, the clock. There was only the sound and the way it filled the space. Her shoulders relaxed. Her breathing slowed. The pressure she had carried all evening began to lift. The room grew still. She did not look up. She didn't need to. She could feel the attention, but it didn't scare her. It warmed her. The tune ended gently, without drama. Just a soft landing. There was a short silence. Then someone clapped. Another followed. Then more. She lifted her hands from the keys and looked around, surprised by the smiles, the quiet awe. She stood slowly, unsure what to do next. That was beautiful, someone said. She nodded, her face warm. Thank you. She stepped away from the piano, heart still racing. She returned to her work, but everything felt different now, lighter, brighter. She didn't know it yet, but that simple tune had opened a door she thought was long closed, and the evening was only beginning. The room did not return to normal after the clapping faded. Something lingered in the air, like a quiet hum that no one could see but everyone could feel. People spoke again, but softer now, more careful, as if they didn't want to disturb whatever had just passed through the space. She picked up her tray and returned to her work, but her hands felt different, lighter, a little unsteady. She focused on breathing, on keeping her movements smooth. She reminded herself that she was still on shift, still a waitress, still expected to do her job. Yet every step felt changed. A guest stopped her near the counter. I didn't know we had live music tonight, they said with a smile. She laughed quietly. Neither did I. The guest nodded, still smiling. You should play more. She thanked them and moved on. But the words followed her. She noticed how often eyes drifted toward the piano now, how people seemed more aware of the corner it sat in. What had been invisible earlier now felt alive. She tried not to think too much about it. Thinking too much had a way of pulling her back, and she didn't want to go back just yet. Another short pause came in the service. The kitchen was catching up, and there was time again. Not much, just enough. Someone at a table spoke up. Will you play another one? They asked, not loudly, but with hope. She froze for a moment. Her first instinct was to say no. She had already done enough, more than enough. She didn't want attention. She didn't want expectations. But then she remembered how it felt, just minutes earlier. The way her chest had loosened, the way the sound had filled something empty. I can try, she said. The word try mattered. It gave her room. She walked back to the piano, slower this time, her heartbeat steady, not rushed. She sat down and adjusted the bench. Her fingers hovered above the keys. This time, she didn't start right away. She let herself remember. She remembered small rooms with plain walls, long afternoons where sunlight moved slowly across the floor. A younger version of herself sitting just like this, counting beats, repeating the same passage again and again until it felt right. She remembered frustration. Tears wiped away quickly so no one would see. She remembered pride too, the quiet kind that came from knowing she had earned something. She pressed the first key. The sound was deeper this time, more sure. The tune grew slowly, unfolding like a story told in careful steps. It wasn't loud or fast. It didn't need to be. People leaned back in their chairs, Some closed their eyes. Others watched her hands move across the keys. She forgot the room again. The music carried pieces of her life that words never could. The years she had spent learning. The years she had spent letting go. The long space in between. Her fingers moved with memory and instinct. She no longer thought about what came next. She trusted that it would be there. A couple near the window held hands without realizing it. A child at another table stopped fidgeting and stared. She felt something rise in her chest. Not sadness. Not joy exactly. Something fuller. Something honest. She let the music change. Let it grow stronger. More layered. The simple tune from earlier transformed into something richer. Shaped by everything she had lived. This was not something she had planned. It simply happened. She was aware now that people were truly listening. Not out of curiosity, but connection. When the final note faded, the silence felt deep and respectful. No one rushed to clap. Then the sound came. Stronger this time. Louder, longer. She stood slowly, her hands shaking just a little. She bowed her head without thinking, a small gesture she hadn't used in years. Someone wiped their eyes. Someone else laughed softly, unsure why they felt so moved. That was incredible, a guest said. She didn't know how to respond. Thank you didn't feel like enough, but it was all she had. She stepped away again, returning to her duties. But now, people stopped her more often, not to ask for food or drinks, but to talk. Where did you learn to play like that? You have a real gift. Do you perform anywhere else? She answered gently, honestly. I learned a long time ago. I don't perform. Each answer felt strange to say out loud. One guest asked why. She smiled politely. Life happens. That seemed to satisfy them. As the night moved on, the restaurant felt warmer. Like everyone was sharing something now, even if they didn't speak about it. Her co-workers looked at her differently too. Not with distance, but curiosity and respect. I had no idea. One of them said quietly as they passed. Neither did most people, she replied. She meant more than just tonight. During a short break, she stood near the piano again. She didn't touch it. She just stood there, listening to the low sounds of the room. For the first time in years, she wondered what it would be like to make space for this part of herself again. Not all at once, just a little. The thought scared her, but it also felt right. She returned to work once more. Plates, smiles, movement. But inside, something steady had been set in motion. She realized that the piano had not taken anything from her tonight. It had given something back. And as the evening slowly moved toward its end, she knew this was no longer just a strange moment. It was a turning point, not loud, not dramatic, but real. As the night went on, the feeling in the room continued to grow. It was no longer just about the music that had been played. It was about what it had opened. People stayed longer than they planned. No one seemed in a hurry to leave. The tables filled with quiet conversations, softer than before. Like everyone was carrying something fragile they didn't want to drop. She moved through the room again, taking orders and clearing plates, but now she felt more seen. Not stared at, not judged, just noticed. When she passed by, people smiled in a different way. Not polite, grateful. One guest stopped her gently. That music, they said. It reminded me of someone I lost. She listened. She always listened. She nodded and said she was glad it meant something. The guest thanked her, holding the moment for a second longer before letting her go. Another guest asked if she would play again later. She didn't answer right away. She wasn't sure yet. The piano no longer felt like a small moment. It felt bigger now, like something that needed care. The kitchen was almost caught up. The staff moved easily, relaxed in a way that didn't always happen. Even the sounds back there felt softer. A manager stepped closer to her while she poured water at the counter. I didn't know you played, they said. She nodded. I used to, a long time ago. Well, the manager replied, people seem happy. If you want to play again, that's fine. She thanked them, surprised by the calm support. There was no pressure, just permission. She finished her tasks and felt the weight of choice settle in her chest. Choice was not something she often felt. Most days were already decided before they began. She walked back to the piano, not to play yet, just to sit. She rested her hands on her knees and looked at the keys. She thought about all the reasons she had stopped. Money, time, fear, responsibility. None of them were wrong. Life had needed her elsewhere, but life had a way of circling back. She placed her fingers on the keys again. This time, the music came from deeper inside. It wasn't practiced or planned. It was honest. It carried joy and regret side by side. The sound filled the room slowly, wrapping around the walls. People noticed right away. Conversation stopped without effort. Chairs shifted, eyes lifted. The melody grew, steady and clear. Her hands moved with confidence she hadn't felt in years. Each note felt like it belonged exactly where it landed. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wasn't thinking about skill or mistakes. She was simply letting the music speak. The room felt smaller and larger at the same time. Like everyone was sharing the same breath, she played through memories she had never said out loud. Missed chances, quiet hopes, long nights where she wondered if she had chosen wrong. The music answered her without words. She felt tears rise but didn't stop. Her fingers kept moving. The emotion made the sound richer, not weaker. A guest near the back closed their eyes and leaned into the chair. Another held their phone but never pressed record. Some moments felt too personal to capture. The piece built slowly, then softened, then built again. It felt like a life told in sound. When she reached the final notes, she let them linger. She allowed the silence afterward to stay, that no one rushed it. Then the room filled with applause, stronger than before. Honest and full, she stood, breathing deeply. Her hands trembled, but she didn't hide them. This was real. People stood too. Not all, but many. The sound surrounded her. She bowed her head again, tears now clear on her face. She didn't wipe them away. Afterward, guests came one by one. Some spoke, some didn't, some simply nodded, eyes shining. One person pressed a small note into her hand. "Don't stop." It read. She held it carefully, like something alive. As the night neared its end, the restaurant slowly returned to movement. Bills were paid, coats were gathered, goodbyes were said, but the feeling remained. When the last guest left and the doors locked, the room felt quiet in a new way, not empty, peaceful. She helped clean up, folding napkins, wiping tables. Her co-workers moved with gentle energy. Someone hummed one of the tunes she had played. She smiled. When everything was done, she returned to the piano one last time. Alone now, she sat and placed her hands on the keys. But she didn't play. She just sat there, breathing. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to imagine a future that included music again. Not as a dream, but as a part of her life. She didn't know what that would look like. She didn't need to. Tonight had already changed something. She closed the piano gently and stood up. The night outside was quiet. The air felt cool and open. She stepped out into it, carrying more than she had brought in. And she knew, deep inside, that the music was not finished with her yet. The days after that evening did not feel loud or dramatic. They felt quiet, but different. The kind of quiet that carries meaning instead of emptiness. She woke up the next morning with the same routine waiting for her. But something inside her had shifted. She made her coffee slowly and sat by the window longer than usual. Her hands rested around the warm cup, and without thinking, her fingers moved gently, as if pressing invisible keys. She noticed it and smiled. For years, mornings had felt like something to get through. Now, they felt like something to step into. She went to work again that evening. The restaurant looked the same. The lights, the tables, the piano in the corner. Nothing had changed on the outside. But when she walked in, a few co-workers looked up and smiled right away. "Good to see you," one of them said, in a way that felt sincere. She nodded and tied her apron, feeling calm. The shift began like any other. Orders came in, plates went out. But guests noticed her more quickly now. Some asked if she would play later. Some simply said they had been there the other night and thanked her again. She didn't rush toward the piano this time. She didn't avoid it either. It was just there, like an old friend. Near the end of the night, when the room softened and the pace slowed, she sat down and played again. Not because anyone asked, not because she felt pressure, but because it felt natural. She played quietly. A few people listened, a few didn't, and that was okay. Something important happened in that moment. She realized she no longer needed the room to stop and watch. She only needed the keys. Over the next few weeks, she played more often. Some nights were busy, and she didn't touch the piano at all. Other nights, she played short pieces, simple ones, honest ones. People began to expect it, but not in a demanding way. It became part of the place. A gentle gift. One evening, someone waited until she finished playing and approached her with a quiet respect. They didn't speak loudly. They didn't make promises. "There's a small place nearby," they said. "They host music on weekends. If you ever want to play, I can connect you." She thanked them and took the note they offered. She didn't look at it right away. For years, opportunities like that would have scared her. They would have felt heavy, like a test she might fail. This time, it felt like an open door she could choose to walk through, or not. At home, she sat at the small table and placed the note beside her. She stared at it for a long time. She thought about all the reasons she might say no. The hours, the fear, the chance of disappointment. Then she thought about the other night, the way the room had listened, the way she had felt. She picked up the note. She didn't decide anything right away. She didn't need to. She allowed the idea to sit with her. Weeks passed. Life continued. Bills were paid. Shifts were worked. But music had returned to her days in small ways. She listened differently now. She noticed sounds. She felt rhythm in places she never had before. One afternoon, she visited a small store filled with instruments. She hadn't planned to. Her feet just carried her there. She stood in front of a piano and pressed a single key. The sound felt like a promise. She left without buying anything, but something inside her felt confirmed. Eventually, she called the number on the note. The first time she played outside the restaurant, her hands shook. The room was small. The audience was quiet. She made a few mistakes. No one minded. They listened. She realized then that perfection had never been the point. She continued working at the restaurant. She didn't leave her job. She didn't change her life overnight. She added to it. Some nights, she wore her apron. Some nights, she sat at a piano somewhere else. Both felt honest. The restaurant piano still waited for her in the corner. It no longer felt forgotten. It felt respected. Sometimes, when the room was empty and the lights were low, she played just for herself. Those moments became her favorite. She thought about how close she had come to never touching the keys again. How easily that part of her could have stayed silent. She understood now that dreams don't always disappear. Sometimes they wait quietly, hoping for permission. One evening, a young guest watched her play and whispered, "I want to learn how to do that." She smiled and said, "You should." She meant it. As time went on, the memory of that first night never faded. It stayed clear, like a marker in her life. Not because everything changed, but because something important began. She no longer thought of herself only as a waitress. She no longer thought of music as something she had lost. She carried both parts of herself with care. And on quiet nights, when the restaurant hummed softly and the world felt close, she would sit at the piano, press the keys, and remember that sometimes all it takes is one simple tune to change the direction of an entire life.